It was the prayer meetings. There would be an announcement made that we would be praying about something or other, and a few of us would gather, maybe only 8 or 10 perhaps, but it was Dallas's prayer that captured my heart. And I saw how important God was to him, and what a connection they had.
It was in 1985. I went down with mumps, and while I was lying in bed, I was given a set of tapes of some talks that Dallas had given. And so my first exposure to Dallas was through a set of tapes that recorded his teaching, which he had given in Durban, in South Africa.
I was at a conference for church leaders, and I heard there about Dallas and a book that he had written about called The Spirit of the Disciplines. And so I picked it up and read it. I was on a flight from Chicago back to California, and I can still tell you the seat that I was sitting on the plane when I read that book.
The moment was frozen in time. I was lying on the sofa reading a copy of The Spirit of the Disciplines, and it was just, I can tell you the texture of the sofa, about pictures on the wall, because it was like, I've never read anything like this before. This is what I've been looking for my whole life.
I was actually at home in San Bernardino finishing an MA in philosophy at UC Riverside when I picked up an issue of Christianity Today and turned to the back, and there was a great article on discipleship. Well, when I looked to see who wrote it, it was a philosopher at USC. I practically fell off my chair. I mean, do philosophers think about discipleship? One would hope so, but here was somebody who was.
It struck me so deeply because it was really clear this was a really smart guy, and he had thought very deeply through the issue of human change, human transformation, and what is it that makes that possible.
It was more the content of what he was saying. It was like, who thinks like this? Who writes like this? I'd never seen anything like it.
I felt frustrated because I didn't know how change was supposed to happen. And I knew I was supposed to read the Bible and pray, but that didn't seem to be producing a lot of change inside me. And so when I read this book, it gave me an enormous sense of hope, because it felt like here was somebody who really knows the human condition and God and faith, and has really thought deeply through how does change happen and what's the role of things like spiritual disciplines in the change process.
So I wrote him a letter, a handwritten letter, and I took the chance. I introduced myself. He didn't know me at all. I asked him whether he'd want to come to South Africa again, and he could come and stay with us. I didn't have an honorarium to pay him, and so I just extended an open invitation for him to come and live with us in Kempton Park, which is a city just outside of Johannesburg, to come and minister to us, to teach, to be with us, to share life with us. And to my surprise, he accepted the invitation.
Part of what was so amazing to me was after reading that book, I wrote this letter to him and told him how much I appreciated it, that I'm a pastor at a church and I live not far away. And he invited me to come to his home and talk with him. And there was no strategic reason for him to do that. I was pastor of a little church, and there was no gain in it for him. And I went to visit that little house in Box Canyon. It's a very simple home behind a picket fence. And he invited me to come in. And what was so striking to me was he's the most brilliant guy I have ever known, but his heart is better than his mind was. And he was just unhurried. When I was with him, it was like he had no place else to go, nothing better to do than just talk with me.
So I didn't know much about Dallas at that time. I called him, asked if I could come to his home and meet him. He was more than happy for that to happen. I did. I checked out, do you believe in God? Do you believe in the devil? Do you believe the Bible's the Word of God? And he was more than on board with all those things. And then I began to study under him at USC and enter into his body of literature.
Well, he came to Virginia and did this conference on clinical theology. And I think the only time I've ever written anyone a fan letter, it was, I put it in his hand as he was getting, on the airplane, going to the airplane. I just was drawn to him, and I kept looking for things to do together. So when we started a journal called Conversations, asked him to be on the editorial board. I said yes, and I kept asking, and he kept saying yes, and we just, over a couple of decades plus, we did a lot of stuff together.
One day, when I had been struggling a lot with depression and feeling very disappointed with the way that my life was turning out, I asked if I could come out and meet with Dallas, so I flew a couple thousand miles and spent a day with him and with Jane. And on that day, Dallas did a lot of listening, but at the end of the day, he asked if he could pray for me. And I'll never forget this. We just stood in the little kitchen of their little house, and Dallas reached over and so nobody had ever done this before. He put one hand on my chest and raised his hand, and then he prayed for my heart. And Dallas was very cerebral. He was not mostly a feeler. He was a thinker. He was a giant brain. But the impact on my body and my heart and my soul when Dallas did that is something that I will carry with me till the day I die.
And what was it? What was the feeling?
It was healing.
Dallas's approach was, first of all, to communicate a warm, accepting attitude toward me, irrespective of what was happening to me. Communicate that he didn't care if I was having an anxiety disorder. He loved me just the same, and that didn't lose respect for me one bit. He laid his hands on me and prayed over me, and then he began to ask me questions. What exactly is going on, and what do you think is at the bottom of this? And as I answered his questions, he was able to formulate some things to read, maybe some practices to engage in, and that was very helpful.
So sounds like a very compassionate.
Dallas is the most compassionate man, along with Dr. Bill Bright, the establisher of Campus Crusade for Christ, that I've ever met in my life, those two men.